Hello friends, welcome to yet another session on essay perspectives. The topic for today is nations do not die from invasion, they die from internal rottenness. As always, I have a personal appeal friends. My book Ethics, Integrity and Aptitude has unfortunately been pirated. The pirated copies are of very low print and paper quality. I urge all of you to buy original. Original copies can be bought from the seller Arvind India on Flipkart and from the seller Affordable on Amazon. Thank you. Friends, as for every other topic, we need to first conceptualize this topic as being made of various components and subcomponents. So first we would introduce this topic, then we would delve upon essence of this topic, then we would try to explain as to how invasion affects the nations. Then we would explain how internal rottenness affects the nation. Then we would try to arrive at a conclusion which one is worse. Then we would, before we conclude, we would explore the steps to mitigate the internal rottenness. Then we would conclude. The best way to start this essay is by taking reference to Japan's rise after nuclear attack. As all of us are aware, the US engendered nuclear attack on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki towards the end of Second World War. So everybody in the world thought that Japan was broken into pieces, and Japan that had sounded death knell to the economy and to the society of Japan, and the Japan would never be able to come out of the adversities that were afflicted by or inflicted by the nuclear attack. But what happened, friends? So finally, the same Japan, which was subjected to nuclear attack by the US, rose from the ashes. And the Japan economy grew so much so that it started giving competition to the US economy itself. The Japan chip making industry, this electronics industry was able to give firm competition to the US, so much so that because of this firm competition from Japanese companies, American company like Intel had to switch from manufacture of memory chips to the business of microprocessors. So what I'm just trying to tell you is, the Japan was subjected to invasion, that is external aggression. Yet the Japan did not die. The Japan had the internal spirit, internal strength to bounce back from that aggression, and then Japan is what it is today. So thus I felt this is the most appropriate way to introduce this essay. Then, as always, since these are philosophical essays, it is important for us to dwell upon the meanings of the essence of the essay statement in a greater detail, so that a proper tone is set for the rest of the essay. So first we need to explain what is invasion. Friends, here I want to emphasize that however simple may your essay topic appear, but it is your duty to explain even the simplest terms and make your understanding clearer to the evaluator also. Don't try to assume that the topic is self-explanatory and you need to directly jump into exploring various dimensions of essay topics. Definitely no. You have to, it is your bounden duty to explain each and every important key term in the essay statement, and finally you should write the essence of the essay topic in 1 or 2 sentences, necessarily, compulsorily, mandatorily, in order to get good marks. Okay, then what are the keywords? Keywords is, one is invasion and one is internal rottenness, right? So then what is invasion? Basically invasion is an external aggression. So invasion means any external country launching a war against a given country is what we call external aggression. So thus this external aggression is a short-term phenomena. So of course it also lingers or handicaps the fortunes of a country, let us say for a decade or for 2 decades. But in the lifespan of a country, in the lifespan of a nation, so 1 decade or 2 decades is too small a age, too small a time. So too short a time, sorry. So thus invasion is a short-term phenomena, and invasion would inflict physical damage, it would inflict economic damage, but it cannot damage the national spirit. This is very important for us. So a war can actually cause extra economic hardships. A war can destroy your businesses. A war can kill your agriculture, can destroy your agriculture fields. A war can tear the livelihoods of people apart. A war can lead to the large scale exodus of people. A war can lead to the infiltration of hapless people from one part of the country to the another part of, from other countries to your country, whatever. But all these things can lead to only physical damages, can lead to only economic damages, but they can never dampen the national spirit. So that is very, very, very important. Then after we have explained the meaning of invasion, we need to focus on internal rottenness. What is internal rottenness, friends? Internal weakness. Just as a unsound body has some underlying ailments in it, similarly a weak nation has some ailments underlying it. What are those ailments? What would make a country, a nation weak? What would make a country or a nation vulnerable to attacks? What would make a country or a nation vulnerable to other weaknesses? So the first one is social discrimination. Don't you think, friends? The social discrimination would not bond the entire population of a nation as one unified whole. So thus, this social discrimination would actually create islands within the nation. It would actually create subgroups. So thus, there would not be unity of purpose. So thus, the national agenda would be felt or perceived differently by every subgroup. So when every subgroup does not feel a unified national agenda, when they don't feel them to, when they don't have the belongingness to a common nation, then I think any attempt to invigorate, to rejuvenate a country, to rejuvenate an economy, to grow and to build an economy is not an easy thing. Thus, a country where social discrimination is significant, then there is definitely internal rottenness. And the second parameter of internal rottenness is corruption. Friends, corruption. What is corruption? Most of us try to understand corruption in the most simplistic way of paying bribes. As civil service aspirants, all of you are aware that corruption is misuse of public office for private gain. This most of us know. But how would it hinder the nation's progress? If everybody starts just collecting money over and above salary for delivering the services, then how would it actually impact country's growth? So this explicitly most of us don't try to think over. Friends, actually let us take the big picture. When will a country develop economically? A country attains economic development only when the business enterprises in that country work efficiently. They have to produce more, they have to sell more so that they can realize more income for the country. Correct? But this corruption would try to scuttle the growth. How? The requisite permissions are not given in time. Undue delay caused by this corruption would actually snatch that competitive advantage of time which these companies would have had permissions been given in time. So a company that let us say there are two countries, country A, country B. Country A has no corruption, country B has full corruption. So country A, both there are two entrepreneurs, one from country A, one from country B, they want to do the same business. Country A, the person applied for permission, he got permission immediately, then he started the business and he started what is called market skimming. I think you must be aware. So a new player tries to skim the market. So he tries to grab the initial market share. So then the second, in the country B, this entrepreneur is trying, but he is not getting permission because of corruption or whatever reason. His file is being delayed unnecessarily, unduly. Then this fellow has lost the competitive advantage. By the time he gets the permission, he starts the business. his competitor in the other country has already spread his tentacles across the globe, has already captured the global markets. So his brand is his presence is felt everywhere. So it becomes very difficult, because having early mover advantage is extremely important for a business. So thus this corruption has actually, let us say I had given you example of only one company, but if it starts happening for all the business enterprises, then obviously the economic development gets scuttled. Correct? So this is internal rottenness. Then class conflict, communalism, regionalism. Correct? So this is actually an offshoot of social discrimination. But under social discrimination does not allow one section of population to realize its potential. Under class conflict, two classes, maybe from different religions, maybe from different regions, maybe the two groups speaking different languages are pitted against each other. So then again the unified purpose is lost. And again, more the government's efforts would go waste in trying to bring harmony between these two persons, and also the synergy that would have got created had these two classes been working together is altogether lost. You don't have persons from two regions working together for achieving synergy. You don't have persons from two religions working together for achieving synergy. Correct? So thus it has a very negative impact on the development of the country. Then nepotism. Friends, the country where merit is respected is the country that progresses. So I think this is an universally accepted principle. But if governance in a particular country is affected by nepotism, then obviously the deserving person is the opportunities are given to a non-deserving person. So actually leaving the deserving person contented, and obviously that person, that frustration would make him either an antisocial element or he would actually flee the country. Correct? So this nepotism is also that internal rottenness, maladministration. So lack of proper administration. So lack of the administration, the administrative will, the political will to ensure equitable, inclusive economic growth, economic development, if that itself is missing, then that's an internal rottenness. Then who will take a country forward if the government in that country itself is indulged in maladministration? Then last is environmental degradation. If a country, finally economic development cannot be restricted to a short term time horizon. It has to be looked at from the point of view of future also. That is what we call sustainable development. So thus, if the country has scant respect for, say, environment, perhaps it would lead to unscrupulous exploitation of resources. It would lead to unscrupulous contamination and pollution of the environment, dampening the quality of life of people. So that is another area, that is another weakness. A country that has respect towards environment is the country that flourishes in the long run. So what I am trying to tell you is these are the various facets of internal rottenness that can afflict a country. Correct? So, and all these are long-term phenomena, mind you. If, unless the invasion happens, the impact of invasion is felt for, say, 1 decade or 2 decades, but the impact of caste, the impact of social discrimination, the impact of gender disparity, the impact of corruption, the impact of nepotism, all these things are felt for centuries. It's a long-term phenomena. And also, while invasion inflicts only physical damage and economic damage but does not dampen national spirit, but these internal rottenness would actually dampen the national spirit also. This is the main reason why internal rottenness is more severe, more dangerous, more worrisome than invasion. Because national spirit is the source of all power. if national spirit itself is dampened, if national spirit itself is compromised, then perhaps the country loses the energy, that source of energy that would help accentuate its growth. So after explaining the what is invasion, what is internal rottenness, it is important for us to, now we have set the stage for essay. Now it is important for us to explain as to how invasion affects a nation. First, it is the violation of sovereign power, because all of us are aware that an external aggression is the direct hit on the sovereignty. China attacking India is a direct hit on the India's sovereignty, right? So that means, what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is ability to govern oneself, self-governance. So you are giving away the power to govern you to someone else, which is a very bad thing. Okay, then once, this invasion would actually lead to contemplation of or promulgation of policies that would suiting the needs of invading country. Friends, nothing can be a better example than the British policies in India. All the British policies in India were aimed at serving the interest of England, Britain. All of us are aware that. So the whole purpose of laying railway lines, laying telegraphs, of course they had spin-off effects and they helped India also. That's a different story. But the whole idea behind those policies was to promote British trade, was to promote British commerce. Correct? And also the land revenue that was being collected by British was actually was intended to fuel the growth of Britain overseas. So thus the policies that an invading country does would always be in the interest of invading country rather than the invaded country. Okay, then drain of wealth. A country that is invaded, obviously a country would not invade just like that, right? So the invasion comes with its own cost. So Muhammad Ghazni invaded India 17 times. Why? To plunder wealth. And all of us are aware the famous theory of drain of wealth propounded by Dadabhai Nauroji. Then subordination of national interest to external interest. Same thing. So finally the national interests would get subordinated to serving external interest. So the British had to recruit Indian soldiers to fight in World War II. Why was that? In World War I and World War II, Indian soldiers constituted a significant portion of the British army. Correct? So our people were serving the interest of Britain. Did India get anything written? Absolutely no. Then absence of local capacity building. See, whenever an invasion happens, the invading country would ensure that the capacities and skills of the local population are not groomed. Did British attempt to create spate of entrepreneurs in India? Were there any policies meant to churn out entrepreneurial spirits in Indians? No, right? Why? Because they don't want, their interest was not to build local capacities. Invasion also affects. Invasion would violate sovereign power. Invasion would lead to policies suiting the needs of invading country, and it would lead to drain of wealth. It would lead to subordination of national interest and absence of local capacity building. And also the best example is Treaty of Versailles and Treaty of Sevres that were signed after First World War, right? It forced the countries like Germany and all to enter into a humiliating treaty that actually served the purpose of winning powers at the cost of losing powers. Correct? So that means aggression, that means invasion also affects a country. Friends, after discussing as to how invasion affects, now it is time for discussing how internal rottenness affects a country. I think the first and foremost adverse effect is brain drain. Friends, a talented individual, a talented entrepreneur, a spirited entrepreneur would definitely intend to stay in a country where his talents are respected, where his spirit is given a free will to translate his ideas into actuality, reality. Correct? So, thus, if that person is not respected, if that person's talents are not allowed to groom, if that person is not allowed to set up its own enterprise, why would he stay in that country? That person would prefer to flee to the country where there are n number of possibilities exist for him to actually to put his potentials to the best possible use. Correct? I mean all of us are aware that that's how America was built. America attracted talent, okay, from across the globe. All the best brains went to America only because America was considered to be a land of opportunities, land of possibilities. Correct? So thus the first adverse effect of internal rottenness is that brain drain. So next is non-inclusive development leading to civil unrest. See friends, what happens? See, once the development has to be inclusive as well as equitable. That most of us would concur. But because of this internal rottenness, the development would be in some islands, in some pockets. Some communities would be economically forward, some communities would be economically backward. So there is always this disparity across gender, there is always disparity across castes, there is always disparity across religions, etc., etc. So thus this would lead to non-inclusive growth. That means only one section of society would grow at the cost of other sections of society. So thus if this disparities continue over a period of time, it would lead to civil unrest. Don't you think, friends? Once civil interest sets in, then perhaps all public property gets damaged, the image of a country gets affected, the investment rating of a country gets affected globally. That would impact the foreign flow, investment of foreign flows, etc., etc., etc. So thus this internal rottenness would actually lead to non-inclusive development, that would in turn lead to civil unrest actually. Correct? So this is the root cause for movement against zamindars, landlords in rural India, right? Because the development was concentrated in only a few families. Then non-realization of potential of every section of society. Friends, I am always reminded of this Nehru's quote where Jawaharlal Nehru says that a country which does not realize the potential of 50% of its population, that is women, would never progress. Correct? So that means only that internal strength of that country manifests in creating an environment that would allow every citizen to realize his potential, to realize his creativity, to realize his abilities. But if there is internal rottenness in terms of social discrimination, or even in terms of nepotism, or even in terms of corruption, then only a few sections of society would get groomed. The nation would be able to leverage the potential of only a few sections of society. So thus the larger sections of society's potential would get unused. It is very, very, very significant. So it's very dangerous. You don't have, because don't you think many women businessmen, many women pilots, many women engineers, many women doctors are today busy doing household chores? Don't you think so? That's it. So then unsustainable development, as I already told you, scant respect to the environment would lead to unscrupulous tapping of resources that would actually reduce the capability of a country to flourish in the long run. Correct? So you would try to gobble up the resources available today so that you are left with nothing tomorrow. Then it weakens the economy, making it more vulnerable to invasion. Correct? What is the country that is easy to be invaded? The country which is very economically very weak, where the people are not educated, where people are voiceless, where the country does not have the capacity to put up a fight and to bounce back. I feel the best example is Sri Lanka. Friends, actually, what is the root cause for Sri Lankan economic crisis? If you go back in the history, we know that the immediate cause is that Sri Lanka borrowed heftily from China beyond its capacity and it could not pay back. Correct? So it got into China's economic trap. But why did it get into the economic trap of China? Why the economy was weak? Why the Sri Lankan economy was not strong enough, not needing any economic aid from any country including China? The only reason was the internal conflict in Sri Lanka. So that actually LTTE movement had weakened the economy very much. So the economy was weakened, and in order to curb that the conflict, LTTE conflict, the Sri Lanka had to seek help from many countries. Correct? So, if not for that ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, perhaps Sri Lanka would have been a more prosperous country. Correct? The potential, the abilities of ethnic Tamils were not put to proper use for whatever reason. I'm just telling you broadly that one ethnic conflict, which is the major reason for internal weakness of Sri Lanka, weakened the economy, made it economically vulnerable. So it had to seek the help of an external power. So that external power, this vulnerability gave elbow room to that external power to tinker with this economy. Correct? So thus internal weakness only makes a country vulnerable. If not for that ethnic conflict, Sri Lanka would not have been what it is today. Then after we have discussed how invasion affects a nation and how internal rottenness affects a nation, it is important for us to compare between the two. That is the whole purpose of this essay, right? So friends, we have understood that both invasion and internal rottenness have negative impact, adverse impact on any nation. But we have to, by seeing the degree, we should be able to draw comparison between the two and say which one is better, which one is worse. Correct? So according to me, invasion hurts, no doubt, but internal rottenness kills. So invasion is a short-term phenomena, internal rottenness is a long-run phenomena. So invasion is like an accident, meeting with an accident. So wherein you would actually get suddenly hurt and you would recover also quickly. But internal rottenness is like having diabetes. So it is a slow killer, slow poison. Okay, your abilities would get dwindled slowly, and slowly you become fragile, frail, everything. So thus invasion hurts, but internal rottenness kills. At least having internal strength makes a nation resilient enough to bounce back from adversities of invasion. Don't you think, friends? That is what I was explaining to you in the introduction through that example of Japan. Correct? So because if you have that internal strength, you bounce back. If you don't have that internal strength, you cannot bounce back. So again, drawing corollary between accident and diabetes, a person who is non-diabetic recovers from accident sooner than the person who is diabetic. Correct? So thus internal rottenness would actually nullify that strength itself. See, any country would need resilient power to bounce back from any adversity, but that internal rottenness would kill that power itself. So thus, though invasion hurts, it is internal rottenness that kills. Then now we have come to a sort of understanding that it is internal rottenness is more serious a problem than the invasion. So then how to mitigate an internal rottenness? How do you ensure that the national spirit is always high, it is always vibrantly glowing? So I think how do you mitigate that rottenness? So the first is having a transparent and accountable governance. The policies made by the country should be transparent, and the actions of any government should be accountable. So if there are proper accountability mechanisms to hold government responsible for its actions or inactions, then perhaps the governments are forced to come up with policies, programs, schemes that would lead to equitable, inclusive economic development, that would strengthen, that would accentuate the internal strength of any country. So that is, so having transparent and accountable governance is the first way to mitigate the internal rottenness. It is the first way to strengthen the ability of any country, internal ability of any country. Having rule of law, not rule of men. So all of us are aware what is rule of law, what is rule of man. A rule of man, under rule of man, the policies are dictated by whims and fancies of some individuals. Under rule of law, the policies and programs are dictated by the statutory requirements. Correct? So this what I am trying to tell you is the country should have such kind of governance where there is as less scope for discretion as possible. So everything should be codified, everything should be predefined, and the actions have to be taken only as per those codified norms. You may call them rules, you may call them laws, you may call them constitution, whatever. So then doctrine of checks and balances. So if there are enough mechanisms to ensure checks and balances in the governance in the country, then that is the best way in which the internal rottenness is reduced. How? If let us say the one organ of the government, say executive, is trying to create policies that would actually benefit only one section of society, then what is the check against it? The best check against it is the elections, independent elections built into our constitution. So after 5 years, people would say that this government is helping only one section, and they would overthrow that government and they would bring back the new government. Then last one is, another point is independent institutions. So every country should have some independent institutions like Election Commission of India, independent judiciary, like Public Service Commission, like independent auditor, etc., etc. So all these institutions would ensure that the internal rottenness is mitigated to the least. If not for these institutions, the entire system would go for chaos. Correct? So then the last point is free and vibrant media. The media is a watchdog. A media defines public opinions. So correct. So thus, if a media is free, if the media is vibrant, then media would only decide as to what course of action that a country should take. Since there are multiple players in the media, so every player is trying to take over the other player, so they would try to find faults with other players also. So in this process of publishing the truth and and keeping a check on publication of untruthful events, finally what emerges is a synthesis of a truth which is acceptable to every section of society, which is the best possible way in which country can be developed. Correct? So thus all these things are some of the mechanisms that would actually try to reduce internal rottenness. You can go on and on. You can talk about free education, you can talk about free healthcare, you can talk about positive discrimination, you can talk about free markets, you can talk about urbanization. So what not, actually the list is endless. Only you should think and you should write. So thus all these are the policies, all these are the practices, all these are the steps that would enable a country to get out of this internal rottenness and to emerge out strong, internally strong. So I think then after this elaborate discussion, it is time for conclusion. So friends, the conclusion remains the same as I have already told you. Both invasion and internal rottenness affect a country, but the internally strong nation is high-spirited, resilient enough to bounce back from the adversaries of invasion. But a country which is internally weak which has internal rottenness does not have the necessary gumption, does not have the necessary resilience to bounce back. Correct? So thus invasion hurts, internal rottenness kills. So thus nations don't die from invasion, but they die from internal rottenness. Thank you, friends. So thank you, all the best.